All right, it's another Exorcist believer review because there's not already hundreds of those on YouTube. Also, sorry for being gone for so long. I am currently in the process of finishing up my PhD in film studies. So I'm wrapping that up in a few weeks, and then I'm hoping to get back on here and post videos more consistently. But for this review, this is probably going to be a short video because honestly, my thoughts on the new Exorcist movie are pretty much in line with what other people have been saying about it. Is this film scary? No, it's not. Does it live up to the legacy of the original Exorcist film? Definitely not. Does it add anything new to the mythos and the lore of this franchise? Not really. I think the biggest problem with this film is that it's actually introducing some interesting ideas, but it's trying to do too much at once, right? It's trying to explore too many different ideas, too many different characters. And because there's just not enough time to really flesh out all of these ideas in one feature-length film, the characters and the story tends to rely on old tropes and stereotypes as a quick way to get you as the viewer to understand what's happening, which is why this film feels like a very generic run-of-the-mill Exorcist movie rather than, you know, a hard-hitting human drama like we get with the original film. So those are my general thoughts. I'm going to get into spoilers for the rest of this video. So if you have not seen the film yet, but you want to and you don't want to be spoiled, then I would say go ahead and click off. As I said, I think this film is exploring some very interesting ideas. Like, I actually like the idea that David Gordon Green is bringing here with having different religions, different belief systems, all having to come together to fight this greater evil. And I think had he taken the time to really explore this concept and maybe explore it throughout this new trilogy that they claim to say that they're making, had it spread out over 3 films and we really get to know like the characters and actually the different nuances of these belief systems, then I think that could have made a really interesting, like, grand finale to this whole thing. But again, as it stands, you don't really learn much about the characters. It's mainly bringing in people from like the Christianity side, and then you also have what I believe to be is like Haitian hoodoo or voodoo traditions. And what I would have loved to have seen is them exploring these different belief systems and having people from these different religions come together and learn about each other's like customs and rituals and stories and realize that there are some similarities between them. We have all these cultural narratives where we're pitting like one religious or one belief system against another. And this idea that if you're someone that believes like a non-traditional religion, like, you know, a paganism, for example, then somehow you're the complete opposite of people that believe in Christianity and like you're their enemy, which is not really true. Like, at the end of the day, when you look at religious belief systems, they all have the same common goal of wanting to make the world better, right? Of wanting to make people better. And I think them having that realization could have been something that was really interesting. But again, it's trying to do too much at once, and it doesn't actually take the time to teach you about these different spiritual beliefs that it's wanting to bring into this film. I know from reading like David Gordon Green's interview in the latest Fangoria, he talks a lot about being really interested in telling stories about like communities and this idea of people coming together. I guess we saw a little bit of that in Halloween Kills, although that movie is so off the rails that I think that message gets lost. And I can appreciate that. I can appreciate him wanting to make these type of movies. I've been saying for a while now that I think one way that we can help this very fractured world that we're living in is by telling more collective stories, right? Telling stories in which it is about community and people coming together, right? Moving away from this very individualistic, it's all about me kind of narratives that we're used to seeing, especially in like Western cinema. But again, there's a time and a place for those stories. And if you are going to do a story with like multiple people or a community, there are ways to tell those stories. I was trying to think like, what is a horror film that has like a large group of people, a large cast that works really well? And of course, one of the first examples that came to mind is John Carpenter's The Thing. And obviously in that movie, you do have some characters that are more developed than others. But I think the reason that The Thing works so well with its large cast is because it's taking place in one setting, right? And it's just this one monster that they're all fighting. Whereas here in this film, you have all of these characters and the characters are going to different locations. And then within those locations, they're finding other random characters and are like bringing them in. And again, it's just too much much all at once, and there is just not enough time to flesh out any of these characters, which again is why the film has this very generic feel to it. And there were times where it almost felt like a parody of an exorcism movie. Like in the third act, and they're performing this exorcism, and you have all of these people, and you have some characters like in the bathroom putting together this like herbal remedy in the bathtub. Then you have like Ann Dowd's character in the corner just reciting Bible verses. And then you have the mom of one of the girls that's like in the kitchen downing shots of bourbon. It might have been Coca-Cola, but it looked like she was just downing a whole thing of bourbon. And then you have this preacher from like this mega church or like some church that the characters are going to. And he's just kind of walking around being like, and I talked to God and asked him to get the devil out of these girls. Like just doing his best Joel Osteen impression, it feels like. So you have like all of this happening, and then you have like this random preacher character that just like comes in, and he comes into the house very like dramatically, and he's got like his Bibles and his rosary, and he's doing the whole thing of like, oh, and the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, I cast you out of these girls. And then it's like a few seconds later, the two possessed girls like snap his neck, and he just drops down dead. And then everyone else is like, oh my God, what do we do now? And I was just kind of laughing at all of this, like it just felt kind of funny to me. And again, the problem is that you have all of these characters, but because they're not like fully developed characters, they are just these caricatures, which also plays into the feeling of it just being a parody of something else. As far as the legacy characters go, I mean, I feel like Ellen Bernstein kind of had the same problem that Jamie Lee Curtis had with the Halloween movies, in that she just feels like such an extreme version of her character from the original Exorcist film. She comes into the film and we learn that she quit her acting career and has now dedicated her life to studying exorcisms. But she herself is not an exorcist, like she says this many times. It was just like, okay, but like, why? Like, why is that something you want to dedicate your life to? To be fair, in this scenario, I guess it does make a little bit more sense, right? Seeing your daughter being possessed by a literal demon. I imagine that would probably mess you up for the rest of your life. Whereas with like Laurie Strode in Halloween, it was a little bit more difficult for me to understand why she would choose to stay in Haddonfield for over 40 years and just build this like military fortress, just waiting for Michael Myers to return. Here in The Exorcist, I guess it's a little bit more believable. Like, I'm willing to suspend disbelief a little bit more, but again, I think the problem that I have with her character is, again, it's just like this tunnel vision where you have these legacy characters that are coming into these sequels, and their whole thing is just like, you know, what happened in the past, the incident that happened in the past. I'm dedicating my whole life to this. I cannot let this go. They just don't feel like characters anymore. There's no like shades of gray. There's no nuances to them. When Leslie Odom Jr.'s character goes to meet Ellen Bernstein, she tells him like, oh, you know, I wasn't even in the room during the exorcism of Reagan. And he's like, oh, why? Like, why weren't you in the room? And her answer is just, patriarchy. And it's like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. What do you mean patriarchy? I mean, as far as the priests in the first film go, like, they believed you about what was happening to your daughter, and they were trying to protect you and other people from getting hurt, and also save your daughter from this demon, and they both sacrificed their life in the process of doing that. Like, I'm not really sure how that reads as misogyny, but okay. Also, I don't remember Ellen Bernstein in the first film really fighting that hard to be in the room during the exorcism. Male directors, I am begging you, as someone that identifies as both a woman and a feminist, please do not just throw in things like, oh, the patriarchy or Me Too or whatever other buzzword is out there for the day. Unless you want to tell a genuine story about these issues, please don't just superficially add it into your dialogue. More often than not, it just sounds cheesy and takes you out of the story. That is a huge nitpick, but again, it's one of these things that we're seeing with these David Gordon Green legacy sequels, where characters will say things or behave in ways that do not at all line up with how things were in the first original films. As far as like the actual possessions go, you know, I thought the makeup looked fine on the girls. I didn't find them particularly scary. It didn't really seem like they were that much of a threat to anyone. Like, you think of possessed Reagan from the first film and she's just slapping the shit out of everyone. And then these girls aren't like really doing much except like hiding under their beds and growling. So I didn't find them that menacing or that terrifying. I mean, to be fair, you do have the one girl that stabs Ellen Bernstein in the eyes with the cross. Which also, speaking of that moment, that is, again, another like dumb character moment. you just have Ellen Bernstein in the previous scene giving this whole monologue of like, yeah, I've dedicated my life to understanding exorcisms, but I am not an exorcist myself. I cannot perform them. Cut to 2 scenes later, and she's going up the stairs by herself to confront one of these possessed girls and is trying to convince the demon to come out of her. I know you weren't able to get Ellen Bernstein on set for very long and you needed a way to remove her from the story, but it's just these like dumb character decisions that, again, just like take me personally out of the film. I don't want to hear the excuses of like, oh, well, it's a horror film, so of course they're going to be dumb. No, it's just lazy writing. Also, like, who is the demon in this movie? Is it Pazuzu? I don't know, maybe I missed it. It didn't seem like they made that very clear as to who the demon was, or if there were multiple demons, or what they wanted. Also, the whole possession thing I didn't really get, because they show the girls out in the woods and they're using like a pendulum, and because they used a pendulum and lit a candle, like that was able to conjure up demons from hell. I mean, I know in the first film Reagan uses a Ouija board, and that's also pretty inaccurate, but at least with a Ouija board you can at least be like, okay, well, she is talking to some spirit. She's allowing the spirit to talk through her, right? Kind of moving her hands along the board. So sure, you can suspend disbelief and be like, yeah, she's opening herself up to this entity. Pendulum, you usually just ask yes or no questions, and it just kind of swings around. That felt weird, that was like the vessel through which the girls get possessed. Again, the thing that I wish the film had done more, which is explore the characters, right? Because you have these girls going out to the woods, and it's established that Catherine, who comes from a very Christian Catholic family, it's like, oh, why does she have this object since she's coming from a very, I think they're Protestant family? It's like, is she going against her family's belief system to try to explore her own spirituality? Like, that's something I would find interesting. And again, I wish the film had developed the characters, especially the girls, a little bit more. And then the ending was kind of weird. Like, so you have the one girl that survives, the other one that dies, and then just ends with Ann Dowd talking to the detective, and she's giving a whole spiel about like, oh, isn't it so great to have like hope and believe in stuff? And I was like, I just watched a girl die in the last scene. What are you talking about? And then she's also like asking the detective or whoever that character was, like, oh, do you think the family, they're gonna be okay? They just lost their child. And the detective goes, yes, I've seen families survive much worse. I was like, what is worse than having your daughter literally get dragged to hell by a bunch of demons? Again, just these weird tonal moments. You had them in the Halloween movies as well. So yeah, overall not a big fan of The Exorcist Believer. I have no idea what they're gonna do for parts 2 and 3, if they do in fact go through with this trilogy. You know, I don't know if this is just like a product of like David Gordon Green wanting to explore some zany ideas and then Blumhouse kind of pulling him back. Because for me, out of the new Halloween films, the one that I found the most interesting, and this is probably gonna be a hot take, but the one that I thought was most interesting is Halloween Ends. For the simple fact that it is kind of zany and goes off the rails and actually does try to explore new ideas. But I know that that film got kind of a cold reception from fans. And so I don't know if, you know, with these Exorcist films, if Blumhouse is trying to be like, okay, you can explore your own ideas, but you also have to put in like these typical possession tropes that they think people are expecting. So we'll see where they go from here, but quite honestly, like, I'm just really tired of these legacy sequels and just these studio films. Like, when I do finish my doctorate and I come back to this channel more consistently, I feel like I really just want to focus on exploring like independent horror and just like horror outside of the mainstream, because yeah, man, these studio films are just like not cutting it. Unless they're gonna give us something like Saw 10, which was a hell of a lot of fun. So those are my thoughts on Exorcist Believer. Let me know what you thought of the film, if you liked it, if you didn't, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.